The war-torn colony of Dranos IV was a graveyard of shattered dreams and forgotten lives. Among the debris of a razed marketplace, Syra, a beautiful alien woman with shimmering emerald skin, clutched her young daughter, Mina, to her chest. Both were covered in dirt and bruises, their once vibrant clothing reduced to tatters. Syra's pleas for help echoed through the empty streets as she approached the soldiers stationed nearby. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "My daughter is injured. She needs medical attention." The soldiers, hardened by war and indifferent to her plight, dismissed her with a wave. "Get out of here, slave. We're not a charity." Tears welled up in Syra's eyes as she retreated, holding Mina tighter. Mina's small body trembled with fever, her breath shallow. Syra whispered soothing words, but despair crept into her heart. They had nowhere else to go. Not far from the marketplace, Elias Ford, a human war medic, worked tirelessly in his makeshift clinic. The tent was filled with wounded soldiers and civilians, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and desperation. Elias was known for his relentless dedication, treating anyone who crossed his path, regardless of their status or species. As Elias stepped outside to grab a moment of fresh air, he spotted Syra stumbling toward his tent. Her appearance was striking, her beauty marred by exhaustion and fear, but what caught his attention most was the child in her arms. "Help us," Syra gasped, collapsing to her knees. "Please, my daughter, she's burning with fever." Elias knelt beside her, quickly assessing Mina's condition. "Bring her inside," he said firmly, his voice steady and reassuring. Syra hesitated, her experiences with rejection making her wary. "Will you truly help us, even knowing what we are?" Elias met her gaze, his eyes kind but resolute. "You're a mother trying to save her child. That's all that matters to me." Inside the clinic, Elias worked with practiced precision. He placed Mina on a cot and began examining her. The child's fever was dangerously high, and her tiny body was dehydrated. "She needs fluids and antibiotics," Elias said, already reaching for his medical kit. Syra hovered nearby, her hands trembling. "Will she be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's strong," Elias replied without looking up. "But she needs rest, care, and time." Syra watched as Elias administered a saline solution and carefully adjusted Mina's temperature with cooling pads. His every movement was deliberate, his focus unwavering. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope flickered in Syra's heart. As the hours passed, Mina's condition stabilized, her breathing evened out, and some color returned to her cheeks. Syra sat by her daughter's side, holding her tiny hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said to Elias, her voice choked with emotion. "You didn't have to do this, but you did." Elias pulled up a chair beside her, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Everyone deserves a chance to survive," he said simply, "even in a place like this." Syra looked at him, her guarded demeanor softening. "You're the first person who's shown us kindness. Why?" Elias hesitated, then replied, "I've seen too much suffering in this war. If I can stop even a little of it, then I'll do whatever it takes." In that moment, an unspoken bond began to form between them. Syra saw in Elias a rare strength, a human who defied the apathy of others to stand for what was right. For Elias, Syra's resilience and devotion to her daughter sparked a determination to protect them, no matter the cost. As the night deepened, Syra, for the first time in years, allowed herself to believe that perhaps not all was lost. The morning sun pierced through the thin fabric of the makeshift clinic, casting warm streaks of light on the cots within. Mina, her fever now subdued, lay peacefully asleep, her small chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. Syra watched her daughter closely, her exhaustion evident but softened by a fragile hope. Elias entered the tent carrying 2 cups of tea. "She's stable," he said, handing one to Syra, "but she'll need days of rest and careful nutrition to fully recover." Syra accepted the tea, her hands trembling. "You saved her. I'll never forget this." Elias shrugged modestly, sitting down across from her. "It's what I'm here for." Syra's gaze lingered on him, her gratitude mingled with curiosity. "Why are you here, Elias? In the middle of a war zone, helping people who everyone else ignores." Elias leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "I was a combat medic for the Terran Corps. I saw too many people die because no one cared enough to help. When my tour ended, I decided to stay behind, to make a difference where it matters most." His words resonated deeply with Syra. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, she admitted softly. Elias smiled faintly. And you're stronger than most people I've met. You've kept Mina safe through all this. That takes more courage than anything I've done. Later that day, while Elias tended to other patients, a nervous refugee approached him. There's talk, the man said in a low voice. The overseer's men are looking for the alien woman and her child. Elias's demeanor shifted instantly, his calm professionalism replaced by alertness. Why? The man glanced around before answering. They say she escaped from one of their camps. They want her back, and they won't ask nicely. Elias found Syra at Mina's side and pulled her aside. We need to talk, he said, his tone urgent. Syra's face paled as he explained. They've found us, haven't they? Not yet, Elias assured her. But they're looking. We have to move you and Mina somewhere safe before they do. Syra's grip tightened on his arm. You've already done so much. I can't ask you to risk more for us. You're not asking, Elias replied firmly. I made a promise to keep you safe, and I intend to keep it. As night fell, Elias prepared for their departure. He packed a small bag with medical supplies and rations, his mind racing through potential safe havens. The war-torn landscape offered few options, but he knew of an abandoned outpost several kilometers away that might provide temporary shelter. Can you carry Mina? Elias asked Syra as they stood at the edge of the camp. She nodded, determination etched into her features. Elias handed her a blanket to wrap the child in, ensuring she would stay warm during the journey. The three of them slipped into the shadows, moving quickly and silently. The camp's perimeter guards were distracted by a supply delivery, allowing them to evade detection. But as they reached the outskirts, the distant sound of raised voices froze them in place. They've noticed we're gone, Syra whispered, her voice tight with fear. Elias gestured for her to keep moving. We're faster. They won't catch us if we don't stop. The journey was grueling. The terrain, uneven and littered with debris from past battles, slowed their progress. Elias led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for threats while Syra struggled to keep up. Mina's small weight a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Suddenly, a shout rang out behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on gravel. The overseer's men had picked up their trail. Keep going, Elias ordered, drawing his pistol. I'll hold them off. Syra hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. No, you can't. Go, Elias barked, his voice leaving no room for argument. As Syra hurried forward, Elias took cover behind a crumbling wall, firing carefully aimed shots to slow their pursuers. His training kicked in, his movements precise and methodical. But the men were relentless, and he knew he couldn't hold them off forever. Syra reached the edge of the outpost and found a hidden corner to shelter Mina. Her heart pounded as she listened to the distant gunfire. She wanted to run back to help Elias, but her daughter's safety kept her rooted. Mina stirred, her small voice breaking the silence. Mama, where's Mr. Elias? Syra knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. He's coming, my love. He's making sure we're safe. Minutes felt like hours before the gunfire ceased. Syra held her breath, every nerve on edge until she heard footsteps approaching. Relief flooded her as Elias emerged from the shadows, his face smeared with dirt but otherwise unharmed. Are you okay? He asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Syra nodded, tears of gratitude spilling down her cheeks. I thought I'd lost you. You won't, Elias promised, his gaze firm. Not as long as I'm here. In the safety of the abandoned outpost, Elias tended to his own minor injuries before checking on Mina. The child, exhausted but unharmed, clung to Syra, her trust in Elias now as strong as her mother's. As the three of them sat together in the dim shelter, Syra reached for Elias's hand. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. You've risked everything for us. Elias met her gaze, his expression earnest. You don't need to thank me, Syra. You and Mina are worth it. For the first time in years, Syra felt the weight of her fear begin to lift. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Mina. Together, they had a chance to survive, and perhaps even to find something more. The abandoned outpost was a relic of a bygone war, its crumbling walls and rusted machinery offering little more than a temporary sanctuary. Elias, Syra, and Mina made their way deeper into its labyrinthine halls, searching for a defensible spot. This used to be a command station, Elias said, scanning the graffiti-scarred walls. It's not much, but it'll have to do. Syra set Mina down on a makeshift bed of blankets. The child, still recovering, leaned against her mother's shoulder, her eyes half closed. "How long can we stay here?" Syra asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Not long," Elias replied. "The Overseer's men won't give up easily. We need to prepare for another attack, or find a way to throw them off our trail for good." As Mina slept, Elias and Syra worked to fortify their position. They barricaded doors with debris and rigged basic traps using what little they had. Elias showed Syra how to handle his spare blaster, guiding her hands as she practiced. "You're a quick learner," he remarked, his tone warm despite the tension in the air. Syra's smile was faint but genuine. "I don't have a choice. Mina needs me to be strong." "You already are," Elias said, his gaze steady. "Stronger than most people I've met." Their shared determination forged a deeper bond, one built on trust and the shared goal of protecting Mina. Their preparations were interrupted by the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. Elias peered through a crack in the barricade and cursed under his breath. "They found us." Syra's face paled. "What do we do?" Elias checked his weapon, his voice calm and reassuring. "We fight smart. Stay close to Mina and follow my lead." The Overseer's men stormed the outpost, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Elias used the traps they'd set to slow them down, but the enemy was persistent. When the attackers breached their barricade, Syra surprised even herself by stepping forward with the blaster in hand. Her aim was shaky but determined, her protective instincts driving her every move. Elias covered her, his precise shots keeping the enemy at bay. At one point, Mina cried out, startled by the noise. Syra rushed to her, wrapping her arms around the child and whispering soothing words. "It's okay, my love. We're going to be okay." Elias glanced back, his heart twisting at the sight. He fought harder, determined to ensure Syra's promise became a reality. The fight dragged on, but Elias's tactical expertise gave them the upper hand. Using the narrow corridors to his advantage, he funneled the attackers into choke points, picking them off one by one. In the heat of the battle, Syra proved her mettle. She fired her weapon with increasing confidence, her focus unwavering despite the chaos. Elias caught her eye and gave a nod of approval. "You're doing great," he called out. Her response was a fierce determination. "I'm not letting them take us." As the last wave of attackers advanced, Elias realized they needed a decisive move. He spotted a crumbling support beam and had an idea. "Syra, take Mina and get to the far side of the room," he ordered. "Now." Syra hesitated but obeyed, shielding Mina as they moved. Elias fired at the support beam, causing the ceiling to collapse and blocking the enemy's path. The sudden destruction sent the remaining attackers scrambling. When the dust settled, the outpost was eerily quiet. Elias surveyed the wreckage, ensuring no threats remained before turning to Syra and Mina. "It's over," he said, his voice steady but exhausted. Syra rushed to him, her expression a mix of relief and gratitude. "You saved us again," she said, her voice trembling. "How do I even begin to thank you?" Elias shook his head. "You don't need to. Keeping you safe is enough." Syra's eyes softened as she stepped closer. "No one's ever fought for us like you have. You've given us more than safety. You've given us hope." For a moment, the weight of their ordeal lifted. As Mina clung to her mother, Elias placed a reassuring hand on Syra's shoulder. "We're not out of this yet," he said. "But as long as we stick together, we'll make it." In that quiet, fragile moment, the bond between them deepened, laying the foundation for a future forged in trust, courage, and the unyielding will to survive. The remains of the outpost provided temporary refuge for Elias, Syra, and Mina, but the specter of danger loomed heavy. After their narrow escape, Elias knew the Overseer's men wouldn't give up so easily. Their only chance for lasting safety lay in reaching a distant settlement known as Haven's Crossing, a neutral zone hidden deep within the galactic rim. "We can't stay here," Elias said as he packed their few belongings. "They'll come back with more firepower, and this place won't hold them off again." Syra nodded, her resolve firm. "Then we leave. Mina and I trust you." Elias glanced at Mina, who clung to her mother's side, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and quiet determination. He crouched down to her level. "You up for another adventure, little one?" Mina managed a small smile, nodding. "If Mama says so, I'll be brave." The trio set out under the cover of night, navigating through the jagged terrain surrounding the outpost. Elias had secured an old hover sled, a rickety but functional vehicle he'd repaired with salvaged parts. It was slow and loud, but it would get them closer to Haven's Crossing. As they traveled, Syra marveled at Elias's adaptability. "You seem to know how to handle anything," she said, her voice a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Years of patching up soldiers and fixing broken equipment," Elias replied with a faint smile. "You learned to make do." Syra's expression softened. "You've done more than that. You've given us a chance we never thought we'd have." Elias met her gaze, his tone serious. "You've done the hard part, Syra, surviving. I'm just here to make sure you keep doing it." Their journey through the barren wastelands was interrupted by a sudden attack. A group of scavengers, opportunists drawn by the prospect of easy prey, emerged from the shadows, their makeshift weapons gleaming under the pale moonlight. Elias immediately took charge. "Stay behind the sled," he instructed Syra and Mina, drawing his blaster. "I'll handle this." The scavengers closed in, their crude vehicles circling like vultures. Elias's sharp aim kept them at bay, but their numbers were overwhelming. Syra, unwilling to remain passive, grabbed a weapon Elias had given her for emergencies. Her hands trembled, but her resolve didn't falter. When one of the scavengers broke through Elias's defenses, Syra fired. The shot was clumsy but effective, forcing the attacker to retreat. Elias glanced back, his expression a mix of surprise and pride. "Nice shot." Syra nodded, adrenaline coursing through her. "I'm not letting anyone take my daughter." With Syra's help, Elias turned the tide of the fight, driving the scavengers off. As the last of them disappeared into the distance, Elias inspected the sled for damage. "We're still functional," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Let's move before they come back." As dawn broke, the barren landscape gave way to rolling dunes and scattered greenery. The harsh terrain began to soften, signaling their approach to Haven's Crossing. But the journey had taken its toll. Mina was exhausted, and even Elias and Syra felt the weight of their ordeal. Elias stopped the sled near a shaded outcrop to let Mina rest. As Syra cradled her daughter, Elias handed her a water flask. "We're close," he said, his voice reassuring. "Just a little further." Syra looked at him, her gratitude spilling over. "I don't know how you keep going. You've done so much for us, and you never ask for anything in return." Elias hesitated, then spoke with quiet conviction. "It's not about asking, it's about doing what's right. You and Mina deserve a chance at a life free from fear." Syra's hand brushed against his, her touch lingering. "You're unlike anyone I've ever known, Elias, and I'll never forget what you've done for us." As they neared Haven's Crossing, they encountered a checkpoint guarded by sentries. The settlement was known for its strict security, and newcomers were met with suspicion. The leader of the sentries, Captain Elias, stepped forward, his sharp eyes assessing them. "You're bringing trouble, aren't you?" Elias asked, his gaze flicking between Elias and Syra. "We're looking for refuge," Elias replied calmly. "This woman and her daughter have been through enough. They need a place to be safe." Elias crossed his arms. "And what's your stake in this, medic? You could have left them behind." "I don't leave people behind," Elias said firmly. "Now, are you going to help us or not?" After a tense silence, Elias relented. "You can enter. But if you bring your trouble here, you'll answer for it." Inside the settlement, Elias, Syra, and Mina were given temporary quarters. The bustling community, filled with people from all walks of life, was a stark contrast to the desolation they had left behind. For the first time in weeks, Syra felt a flicker of hope. As they settled into their new surroundings, Elias took a moment to sit with Syra and Mina. "This isn't the end," he said, "but it's a start." Syra reached for his hand, her voice steady. "You've given us more than a start, Elias. You've given us a future." Elias looked at her, his expression softening. "And I'll keep fighting for it. For both of you." In the heart of Haven's Crossing, surrounded by the promise of safety, they began to imagine a life no longer defined by fear, but by the hope of something greater. Their journey was far from over, but together they had found the strength to keep moving forward. The peace in Haven's Crossing was fleeting. Word of Syra and Mina's escape had reached the ears of Overseer Korath, a ruthless warlord who prided himself on absolute control over his slaves. Furious at their defiance and humiliated by his men's failure, Korath sent a strike team to the settlement with a clear directive. Retrieve the fugitives or burn the place down. Inside the settlement, Elias sensed the tension growing. The settlers, wary of Korath's reputation, began murmuring about the newcomers who had drawn his ire. Elias, unbothered by the whispers, focused on fortifying their position. Korath won't back down, he told Captain Rylas, who oversaw Haven's defenses. We need to prepare for a siege. Rylas frowned. We've faced raiders and scavengers, but nothing like Korath's forces. If they attack, it'll be a massacre. Elias's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they don't reach us. Elias quickly took command of the settlement's defense efforts, using his experience as a war medic and strategist to organize the settlers. He scouted choke points, set up barricades, and trained the able-bodied in basic combat techniques. Syra, unwilling to remain idle, volunteered to help. You don't have to do this, Elias said as she stood beside him, sorting weapons and supplies. Syra met his gaze, her voice firm. I do. Mina needs me to be strong, and so do you. Elias couldn't argue with her resolve. Together they worked tirelessly, their shared determination strengthening their bond. As night fell, Mina tugged on Elias's sleeve. Mr. Elias, she said softly, will the bad men come here? Elias knelt beside her, his voice steady. They might, but I won't let them hurt you or your mom, I promise. Mina nodded, her trust in him absolute. I believe you. At dawn, Korath's forces arrived. The settlement's alarms blared as armored vehicles and heavily armed soldiers approached the gates. From his vantage point, Elias spotted Korath himself. A hulking figure encased in gleaming battle armor, his presence a symbol of domination. Korath's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Surrender the woman and the child, and no one else will be harmed. Rylas turned to Elias. What's the plan? Elias's eyes hardened. We don't give them anything. Korath's forces launched their assault, but Elias's preparations paid off. Traps and barricades slowed the attackers, while the settlers fought fiercely to protect their home. Elias led from the front, his precision and courage inspiring those around him. Syra, stationed at a defensive position, fought alongside the settlers. Her aim, honed during their journey, was sharp, and her resolve never wavered. We won't let them take us back, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Korath, enraged by the resistance, stormed the battlefield. His brute strength and advanced weaponry made him a terrifying opponent. He breached the settlement's defenses, heading straight for Elias, Syra, and Mina. Elias confronted Korath in the heart of the settlement, his blaster aimed at the warlord. You've lost, Elias said, his voice calm but resolute. Turn back now, or this will end badly for you. Korath sneered. You're just a human medic. Do you really think you can stop me? The battle that followed was brutal. Korath's sheer power was overwhelming, but Elias's agility and tactical skills kept him in the fight. Meanwhile, Syra, refusing to remain on the sidelines, used her knowledge of the settlement's layout to set a trap. Elias, she called out, lure him to the central tower. Elias understood immediately, leading Korath into the narrow passageway beneath the tower. Syra activated a hidden mechanism, collapsing the structure onto Korath. The warlord was pinned beneath the rubble, his armor damaged and his forces in disarray. With their leader incapacitated, Korath's soldiers retreated, unwilling to face further resistance. The settlement erupted in cheers as the danger passed, but Elias and Syra remained focused on securing the area. As the dust settled, Elias approached the fallen warlord. Korath, bloodied but alive, glared at him. You think you've won? I'll come back for them. Elias leaned in, his voice low and cold. You won't get the chance. With that, he activated a signal, alerting nearby allied forces to take Korath into custody. In the days that followed, Haven's Crossing celebrated its victory. Syra and Mina were no longer viewed as outsiders, but as part of the community. The settlers, inspired by their courage, worked together to rebuild stronger than before. One evening, Elias and Syra stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. Mina played nearby, her laughter filling the air. You did it, Syra said, her voice filled with gratitude. You saved us again. Elias shook his head. We did it. You fought just as hard as I did. Syra smiled, her hand brushing against his. I don't know where we'd be without you, Elias. You'd be just fine, he replied, his voice soft. But I'm glad I could be here for you, for both of you. As the stars began to shine, Syra turned to him, her expression tender. You've given us more than safety, Elias. You've given us a family. Elias smiled, his heart full. and you've given me something worth fighting for." In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the promise of a brighter future, they stood together, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were truly living.